Yo, welcome back everybody. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. As you can tell by the title of this video, I'm going to be going over my top 15 quarterbacks heading into the fantasy season. I have already uploaded my top 24 running backs and wide receiver videos, so if you haven't seen those, make sure to go check them out. And one thing I want to note about the quarterbacks before we really get into it is that I'm really focused on upside when it comes to quarterbacks. Because the elite guys in fantasy are so good now and scoring so many points, to be able to compete with them with the lower end quarterbacks, you really need to hit the upside picks. So I don't know, some of my picks might be a little bit surprising just because I'm really shooting for upside with most of this, but it'll make a little bit more sense when we actually get to those guys. Anyways, though, let's actually get into these rankings. Alright, so first up for me, no surprise here, going to be Patrick Mahomes. He won the MVP last year, won the Super Bowl last year, was the quarterback one on the year. And last season, there were a ton of people that were actually doubting him because he lost Tyreek Hill. And it wasn't so much that they didn't think he was going to be good anymore. They just didn't know if he had that number one overall quarterback upside anymore. Obviously, he does. He did it last year with Travis Kelce basically only. And I honestly don't think a lot has really changed. I guess they lost Juju, but that really isn't that big of a factor for him. They added young rookies like Rashee Rice. Justin Ross is actually going to be playing this year, but honestly, in my opinion, I just think that Patrick Mahomes is way too good to not be the quarterback one. I think he has the best combination of an extremely safe floor with a really high upside. He just doesn't tend to have bad weeks, really. Not a lot really needs to be said. So we'll go on to my quarterback two, who is going to be Josh Allen. He was the quarterback two this past year, but he actually struggled towards the end of the season, or I guess struggled for Josh Allen standards. He did injure his UCL, which is in his throwing elbow, and so I think a lot of that was due to it, but him struggling is being the quarterback two because he was a quarterback one before he injured his elbow, and then after that time he was still the quarterback two in that span. So another guy who just has such a safe floor. Nothing really has changed this offseason. All the weapons are coming back. They also added Dalton Kincaid, which is only another bonus, and so another top three locked and loaded quarterback. And the last guy I'm going to have in this tier one is going to be Jalen Hurts. He finishes the quarterback three last year, but he was actually the quarterback one in points per game. He just didn't play at the end of the year. Has some of the best weapons in the entire NFL with AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert. I think the only real worry with him is that he lost his offensive coordinator and Shane Steichen, who is now the head coach of the Colts, but his head coach is still there, so I think he still should be fine. They also didn't outlaw his 1-yard push, so that's definitely a bonus for him. So I think another guy who is just going to absolutely dominate if he's on the field. And I think that these top three guys are pretty consensus in this tier one. So we're going to move on to the tier two guys where a lot more question marks really start to show. The first guy I'm going to have here, my quarterback four, is going to be Lamar Jackson. He had a pretty tumultuous season last year as he was injured for a lot of it, and he also lost a lot of his weapons like Rashad Bateman. He was still the quarterback six though in points per games in those games that he did play. And through the first 3 weeks of the season, when he actually had all of his weapons healthy last year, he was a quarterback one. And now the issue this year is that there's really a lot of projections going on with his offense because they have a new offensive coordinator who wants to throw the ball a lot more, which should be good for Lamar because that will just open up the game more for him. They also added Zay Flowers in the first round and Odell Beckham Jr. Rashad Bateman is healthy. Mark Andrews is there. So he has by far the best weapons he's ever had in his entire career. And while they want to pass him more, then that'll be good. This will also create situations for him to scramble more. So I think that Lamar is going to dominate even though there is so many projections going on. I think one of the few guys outside of that top three who is able to finish as the quarterback one. Obviously, I mean, I have him at my quarterback four. And like I was talking about in the beginning of the video, I am going for upside with my quarterback. So I have Lamar ranked really highly at my quarterback four here. And another guy, like I was talking about with the upside case, I'm a quarterback five. I'm going to have Justin Fields here. Now, he had a very interesting season because there were so many different changes throughout it. Like we really saw a shift in the offensive identity about halfway through the season. And even though he really struggled to start the year, he finished as the quarterback six on the season, and he was the quarterback four from week 8 on. And there was also a time span from week 6 to week 15 where he was on pace for 1,700 rushing yards as a quarterback. Obviously, we are not projecting that to happen because if that was the case, then he'd be the clear quarterback one on the season. But it's just showing you the type of upside that he does have. And now they added DJ Moore, who is a legit wide receiver one for him. Another situation like Lamar where he has by far the best weapons he's had in his career. Darnell Mooney was also injured last year, so he'll be back and healthy. Cole Kmet got paid. And so this really comes down to if Justin Fields can take that next step as a passer, and if he can, then he has another legit chance to finish as a quarterback one on the season. But if he doesn't, I still think this quarterback I finished as quarterback 6 last year. So this area is, I think, probably around his floor, maybe a little bit lower. But like I talked about, like I've mentioned a couple times now, we're going for upside. So I want a guy like Justin Fields. I've been loving him where he's going in drafts because he's normally going around the quarterback 6 or 7. So I've been taking him everywhere. Really reminds me last year of Jalen Hurts, although I think we had a little bit more proven passing ability with Jalen Hurts last year, and his weapons were even better than Justin Fields were. But I think he has that ability to take that next step. So I've been taking the shot on him. And then moving on to my tier 3 of quarterbacks, at my quarterback 6 to start it off is going to be Joe Burrow. Now he is kind of injured right now with his calf, but that was a couple weeks ago, and it sounds like he'll be fine to start the year, so I'm not too worried about it. And he finished last year as a quarterback 4 in points per game and in total points, but I don't really think that he has the ability, like the guys ahead of him, to finish as a quarterback 1 overall in the season. I guess if he threw 50 touchdowns, he could, but the probability of that happening is, I think, a lot lower than Justin Fields rushing for 1,000 yards. But I think as the quarterback 6 or 7 off the board, that's pretty much around where his floor is, since he has some of the best weapons in the entire NFL with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. He's also proven that he is an elite pocket passer, one of the best in the NFL, so you can feel very comfortable with him. Then right after him from the same draft class, I'm going to have Justin Herbert here. He's somebody who I've really been liking in drafts where he's going because he is going behind Burrow, but normally a round or 2 after. And I think that Burrow and Herbert are very similar situations and outcomes. But Herbert just seems to be a little bit of a discount since he had such a tough season last year where his weapons got hurt at the very beginning of the season. He also broke his ribs or hurt his cartilage in his ribs like week 3 of the season. He still finished as a quarterback 11, so obviously a massive disappointment last year, but he still threw for a ton of yards. The touchdowns just didn't come. He was hurt, so he couldn't run the ball like he normally did his rookie year. And now this year, everybody's healthy. They added Quentin Johnston in the draft in the first round, so that will definitely help. They also have a new offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore, who he used to be with the Cowboys. He was always a really good offensive coordinator. So him coming to the Chargers, they're going to want to pass the ball a lot more, and I think that really should benefit Justin Herbert a ton. And he's another one of the guys that has a possibility of, throwing 50 touchdowns almost like Joe Burrow does. And so I think that Justin Fields and Justin Herbert probably have been my 2 favorite targets in the drafts. I've kind of been wanting one of these 7 guys because I really think that in fantasy now, the quarterbacks are just so good that if you don't have one of these guys who are putting up, 25, 30 points a week almost, then it could be really hard to compete at this point. But I just find it tough spending like a second round pick on a guy like Mahomes or Allen. So this tier of Justin Fields or Justin Herbert, I've really been liking a lot in drafts. And the last guy that I'm having tier 3, who I feel a little bit tough having him in tier 3, but I've kind of been taking him very clearly as my quarterback 8, is going to be Trevor Lawrence. Damn, why is his headshot so small? I'm going to fix that. But he actually did finish as a quarterback 8 last year, and he was a quarterback 6 from week 6 on. So I think relatively speaking, this is near where his floor is. The one thing is that he did have 5 rushing touchdowns, which could be a bit of an outlier. It's just really hard to tell, especially from his rookie year. But he's like 6'6" and a big body. He doesn't run the ball a ton, but he was very efficient on the goal line this year. But I think having another year in the system to develop, it will be a huge benefit for him. And they also added Calvin Ridley, who is a legit or could be a legit wide receiver 1 for them in the NFL terms, not for fantasy terms. And with paying Evan Ingram, having Christian Kirk there, Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, I think that this is going to be a really good offense. And if that's the case, then he's another guy who has a possibility of throwing for over 4,000 yards and 35 touchdowns. And kind of the last guy that I really feel comfortable with having that has the ability to take that next step to superstardom. And then moving on to the next tier, this is where a lot more question marks I think start to come in. First guy I'm going to have is going to be Deshaun Watson. He's obviously a very tough case because he hadn't played football in like 2 years, and then he came in last year around week 13 and was a quarterback 14 from when he came on, but then was a quarterback 1 after that first game. So from week 14 on, he was a quarterback 1, and then the last 2 weeks of the season, he was actually pretty productive for fantasy. I don't know how many people out there are watching and have been playing fantasy football for many years, but if you remember Deshaun Watson a couple years ago, he was one of the best quarterbacks in all of fantasy. He had 3 years back to back to back where he finished as quarterback 5, and when you take like 2 years off playing football, I can totally imagine it's going to be tough coming right back into it. But now he's had an entire offseason to get acclimated, get a part of this system. They also added Elijah Moore, which should be at least a little bit of a help. If he can return at least close back to form, then he could totally outproduce this value, but there is a lot of risk there. So I have been worried about it, but I think at this point, his risk is pretty much baked into it. Then after him, I'm going to have Tua here. I think this might be a little bit higher than some people have him, but we just saw some really elite stretches from Tua last year. And like I talked about in the beginning of this video, I'm going for upside. I'm not trying to worry about injury too much because really anybody can get injured. And so I think if Tua is playing and Tua is healthy, he's going to be really good. We saw it last year. He also has some of the best weapons in the NFL with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Plus his head coach knows how to utilize them all very well. So Tua definitely has the possibility when he's playing to be really, really good for fantasy. Doesn't really have any rushing baseline, so that definitely is a worry there. So that really high upside isn't quite there for him. But I think if he's healthy, he'll be a top 10 quarterback. So that's why I got him ranked right now. And then after him at my quarterback 11, I have Dak Prescott here. He broke his thumb in the very first game of the year last year. I don't know if you guys remember that. And then he had some of the worst interceptions of his entire career. So I definitely think there is some correlation there of having a broken thumb and then not being very accurate with the ball. But once he was like fully healthy from week 7 on, he was a quarterback 6 over that time. And we've seen it year over year where he can be very productive for fantasy. Just actual football kind of tends to choke. He also lost his offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, so that could definitely be a worry for him since it sounds like they've been wanting to run the ball more, except that their offseason moves have actually shown the opposite of that. So it's really been hard to figure out what exactly the Cowboys want to do this offseason. So I've had to move him down a little bit. I had him all the way up at the top of this tier, but I think they're just a little bit more upside with Watson and Tua. So I've been taking them ahead of him. And then the last guy in this tier, just a full upside pick, is going to be Anthony Richardson at my quarterback 12. Like I was talking about, like pretty much at this point in the draft, you're kind of going to be streaming the position. So at this point, I really just want to go for the biggest upside. And Anthony Richardson has the tools to be a just absolute stud for fantasy. Now, is that going to happen? I have no idea. But at this point, I'm willing to take the shot on it because if it does hit, he could easily finish as like a top 5 quarterback almost purely off of his rushing ability. And so he's one of the few cases where I will take him and then take somebody later like a Geno Smith and actually take 2 quarterbacks. Because normally I'm trying to get one of these earlier guys, and only if I'm taking one of them, I'm not taking another guy. But if I'm taking Anthony Richardson, I don't want to start him. He's kind of saved for later in the season. So I'll take another quarterback a little bit later after him who can hold me over for the first couple weeks. But I've really been liking that strategy and really trying to go for the upside cases here. But it definitely has been scary. I was been burned by Trey Lance multiple years in a row now. So I know how worrisome it can be. But like I said, I'm trying to win here. I'm going for upside. And then in my last tier, I'm going to have Kirk Cousins to start it off. Pretty consistent, solid guy. Could be a good streamer. It's kind of like, you can kind of see the difference between Kirk Cousins and Anthony Richardson. I think that there's just so much upside with him. I think Kirk will be solid. I don't think he has the potential to finish extremely high. He also has Justin Jefferson, which is just like a safety valve for him because he's, probably the best wide receiver in the NFL right now. And they also added Jordan Addison. They have TJ Hawkinson. So really good weapons there that allows Kirk to be solid for fantasy, but never going to be one of the elite guys. Then at 14, I'm going to have Daniel Jones here. He's a more interesting case. I think he has a higher upside than Kirk Cousins, but also a way lower floor. So there have been times where depending on who's going later, I'll just take whoever that is. But Daniel Jones has way more of a rushing ability, which allows for way bigger games, but he also has way more bust games. The one thing is that they really improved his receiving core this offseason. They added Darren Waller. They drafted Jalen Hyatt, added Paris Campbell. Darius Slayton should be healthy. Hopefully Wan'Dale Robinson is healthy. Just a bunch of guys that weren't there and they're going to be healthy now. Definitely the best receiving core that he's had in his entire career. So we'll see if he's able to make more of a step passing because that's really what he's missing. And if he can be a little bit more consistent. So another guy who I like taking because there is some upside there, but another person who if I am taking him, probably going to be streaming for a while. And another thing with the issue with him is that if you're taking him, like I said, you are streaming him and they play the Cowboys to start the year off, and you probably don't want to play Daniel Jones against the Cowboys. He was terrible against them both times last year. So you don't really want to take Daniel Jones and then not play him week 1 because he's on your roster. So somebody who I kind of have been staying away from, I have taken him in best ball because that's a whole different situation. But for actual redraft, just tough to start the year off, but would love to pick him up on the waiver wire later in the year if I'm streaming. And the last guy in this top 15 is going to be Geno Smith. He was a quarterback 5 last year and the quarterback 8 in points per game. So you can see just a little bit of discrepancy there where he was just on the field for the entire time, which allowed him to finish so high. Has great weapons as well with DK and Lockett. I think that really helped him last year. Added JSN this offseason and Zach Charbonnet, 2 great pass catchers. So I think what happened last year for Geno, a lot of it's going to be the same. Another person who just doesn't have great upside, but somebody that I've absolutely loved pairing with Anthony Richardson later in the draft. So if I need somebody to start it off, because I think that he'll also be solid to start the year. And then the guys right outside of it are going to be Aaron Rodgers and Jared Goff. You could go really with any of these guys. You can see they're all basically the same tier, kind of interchangeable here, but all guys who I think will be solid, have weeks, have down weeks, all going to be good streaming options if you're going to punt the position. So there's my top 15 or I guess 17. Let me know what you guys think about it, what you disagree with, what you like. Last rankings are going to be my top 15 tight end rankings that should be coming out soon, so make sure you stay subscribed for that, and I'll catch you guys there. Later.